The asteroid station was unusually quiet that morning. The usual chatter of dragon caretakers and the hum of the heating cores that kept the hatchery warm were gone. The dragons that had recently hatched were nowhere to be found. Their small nests, once filled with tiny, restless claws and bright, curious eyes, now lay empty. The air felt heavier, colder, as if the life that had always filled the place had vanished. Elder dragons circled the room, their wings folding back as they whispered to each other. They had never experienced this before. Hatchlings did not leave without reason. The humans were new to the station, and the dragons did not trust them fully. Some even muttered that humans were careless, weak, and not responsible enough to be near their young. Yet no human had been close to the hatchery when the disappearance happened. The mystery grew with every passing hour. Commander Zale, a dragon known for his careful thinking, stood at the edge of the empty room. His scales reflected the pale light of the station's artificial sun. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned each nest one more time. Nothing. Not a feather, not a claw, not a tiny print in the warmth of the bedding. The hatchlings were gone, vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, far below, in the maintenance decks of the station, a human named Arvin Holt worked quietly. Arvin was a mechanic, one of the few humans trusted to maintain the oldest engines of the asteroid station. He had no idea that dragons were missing. His life was simple: fix machines, check power cores, and avoid making mistakes that could make the station collapse. Arvin was not loud. He did not argue. His hands were always busy, moving with care as if each bolt and wire had a life of its own. That morning, as he wiped grease from his hands, he felt a soft movement nearby. At first, he thought it was a small rodent or a maintenance drone that had wandered off course. Then he heard the faintest sound, a tiny, rhythmic breathing that did not match the hum of the engines. Curious, Arvin leaned over a pile of old heat regulators and saw tiny shapes curled up in the shadows. They were small, smaller than anything he had ever seen before. Their scales shimmered faintly in the dim light, reflecting green, blue, and gold. They opened eyes the size of a human fingertip, and for a moment, Arvin froze. He had heard of dragons in stories, but he never expected to see them here, in the hidden corners of the station. The hatchlings seemed equally cautious. They blinked at him, wings tucked tightly to their bodies, tails curling around themselves for warmth. Arvin remembered the quiet lessons from the few humans who had met dragons before. Do not panic, do not make sudden movements, do not try to grab them. He simply sat down slowly, keeping his hands visible, and whispered softly. "It's okay," he said. "I won't hurt you." The hatchlings tilted their heads, listening. Their tiny noses twitched as they caught the scent of something new, something alive, yet safe. Slowly, one of the smallest hatchlings crawled toward Arvin's chest. It hesitated, lifted a tiny claw, then rested it gently against the fabric of his jacket. The others watched, some shifting closer from the shadows. Arvin did not move. He did not speak again. The silence was broken only by the quiet hum of engines and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the hatchlings as they tested their new guardian. Minutes passed like hours. He felt warmth against his chest as more small bodies crawled onto him, seeking comfort and safety. Far above, the elder dragons continued to search. Drones scanned the maintenance levels, sending images back to the council. Every corner of the station was examined, every vent opened, every darkened tunnel explored. Yet no one saw the small sleeping shapes nestled against a human in the depths of the decks. Zale, the commander, grew anxious. He could sense the presence of his young, but senses showed nothing. He turned to a nearby dragon and whispered, "The humans do not understand our young. Perhaps that is where they are hiding, but no human is small enough to carry them. And yet, something tells me they are close." The story of the missing hatchlings spread through the station. Messages flew between the different decks. Some humans were blamed, some dismissed as irrelevant. Caretakers argued over what could have caused the disappearance. But none of them thought to look in the maintenance bays where a single human quietly became the center of an unseen miracle. By midday, Arvin had not moved. The hatchlings had fallen asleep on him, soft warmth against his chest and shoulders. He could feel their small hearts beating in sync with his own. It was a strange sensation, a connection that neither species could explain. Outside, the station continued its normal rhythm, unaware of the tiny miracle hidden below. When evening came, the hatchery remained empty, and the elders were more confused than ever. The humans were called for questioning, but Arvin stayed in the maintenance decks, his hands still sticky with grease, his body frozen so the hatchlings would not wake. He did not care about inspections, rules, or blame. He only cared about the small lives sleeping in his arms. Somewhere in the council chambers, a young dragon whispered, "They are safe, somewhere." And in the lower decks, among wires, metal, and humming engines, the hatchlings slept, completely unaware that they had chosen a human who would protect them without understanding why, without needing to. The station remained quiet, the secret of the vanished hatchlings kept safe in the warmth of a human chest. No one knew the truth yet. The silence in the nest would continue. And the galaxy would wait, unaware that hope had taken the most unexpected form, a mechanic who did nothing but be gentle. The first part ends with the station's lights flickering as night approached, casting long shadows over empty nests. Somewhere far below, a human remained still, a soft breathing rhythm shared between species, hiding the greatest secret of all. The hatchlings had chosen their guardian, and the world above had no idea. Arvin Holt did not know he was being watched. In the quiet, humming depths of the asteroid station, he moved among old engines and broken panels, wiping grease from his hands and tightening loose bolts. Most people thought humans were weak, noisy, and clumsy. In the upper decks, the council dragons whispered that no human could ever understand the delicate hatchlings. And yet, here he was, completely alone, doing work that others avoided. He had lived in the maintenance decks for years, surrounded by wires, blinking lights, and engines that groaned under the weight of the station. It was not glamorous work, and it was certainly not heroic, but Arvin liked it that way. Everything had rules. Everything could be fixed if you understood it. There was no chaos, no politics, no judgment. Just machines, waiting quietly for a human who knew how to care for them. What Arvin did not know was that his quiet life had become a refuge for something far more fragile and alive than any engine. The dragon hatchlings, lost from their nest for days, had somehow found their way to him. One by one, they crept into the shadows of the maintenance bays, moving silently over pipes and under crates, guided by an instinct they could not name. They sensed his heartbeat through the cold metal floors, the warmth in his chest even beneath layers of clothing, and they knew they were safe. Arvin first noticed the soft rustle in the corner of the bay. At first, he thought it was a stray maintenance drone, buzzing weakly after hours of overuse. But then he caught a glimpse of something small, something that shimmered faintly with colors that did not belong to any machine. His brow furrowed as the little creature moved closer, wings tucked, eyes wide and blinking at him. He froze, remembering stories he had heard from the few humans who had interacted with dragons in the upper decks. Dragons were dangerous, yes, but these looked smaller, more fragile. Their scales were soft, almost glowing in the dim light, and they had the quiet presence of beings who had seen far too much fear. Arvin knew he had to be careful. He lowered himself slowly to the floor, keeping his hands open and his voice soft. "It's okay," he said. "I won't hurt you." One of the hatchlings tilted its tiny head, blinking slowly. Its claw brushed against Arvin's sleeve, testing, feeling, measuring. Then another moved closer, wings brushing the first hatchling as it crawled along the floor toward him. Before he knew it, several small bodies were at his feet, circling him carefully. They smelled the warmth of his skin, the faint scent of oil and sweat that clung to him after hours of work, and they seemed to recognize something familiar, something safe. Arvin sat very still, afraid to make a sudden movement. The hatchlings climbed onto his lap, then onto his shoulders, curling into balls that fit perfectly in his hands. Their tiny hearts beat fast, and their breathing was quiet but steady. He could feel their warmth against him, tiny scales brushing his arms, soft wings against his chest. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Hours passed without anyone noticing. The upper decks were busy with alarms, calls, and frantic searches. No one thought to check the maintenance decks. Humans were not trusted in dragon spaces, and dragons did not expect their young to find refuge with one. Yet here, hidden among the engines and pipes, Arvin became something extraordinary without even realizing it. A guardian chosen not by law or duty, but by instinct. When he moved slightly to adjust his position, the hatchlings stirred but did not leave. They seemed to sense his gentleness, the rhythm of his heartbeat, and the calmness in his movements. One of them crawled higher, resting its head near his collarbone. Another tucked its tail around his wrist. For the first time in days, the hatchlings felt completely safe, completely unafraid. Arvin thought about calling someone, telling the council, but he stopped himself. If the hatchlings had come to him, there must have been a reason. The council dragons would see the human as unfit, weak, careless. They would remove the hatchlings and return them to the nest, where they might once again feel lost, cold, or trapped. He could not allow that. He decided to wait. To stay still. To let them trust him fully before anyone else interfered. Night fell on the station, and the artificial sun dimmed, casting long shadows across the decks. The engines hummed, the pipes vibrated softly, and Arvin remained still, his body a quiet island in the center of a small miracle. The hatchlings were asleep on him now, their tiny claws resting lightly on his arms and chest, wings tucked in for warmth. He felt their small hearts beat against his own, and for a moment, he wondered how something so small could teach him so much. He thought of the upper decks, of the alarms, of the frantic searches, and he smiled softly. The galaxy did not understand humans, but perhaps it did not need to. Sometimes, the quietest beings could protect the most precious lives in ways no one else could imagine. And perhaps, he thought, that was exactly why the hatchlings had chosen him. As the night deepened, Arvin allowed himself to relax slightly, letting the warmth of the hatchlings fill him with a strange peace. He could feel every tiny movement, every shallow breath, and he knew that he would not move until morning. Not out of fear, but out of trust. The hatchlings trusted him completely. That was enough. Far above, the council continued to argue. Some dragons claimed that humans were dangerous, others that they were irrelevant. None of them suspected the truth, that their young were hidden in plain sight, safe and warm, in the care of a human no one had ever watched, no one had ever expected, and no one had ever understood. Arvin did not notice their discussions. He did not care. He only felt the small, steady weight of the hatchlings against him, the soft rise and fall of their tiny bodies, and the quiet miracle of being chosen without knowing why. In that moment, he realized something important. Being human was enough. Being gentle, patient, and warm was enough. That alone had earned their trust. And so, the human no one watched became the protector of the dragons no one could find. Hidden in the quiet of the maintenance decks, he stayed still, letting the universe continue above him unaware of the small lives he now held in his hands. The hatchlings had found their refuge, and in doing so, they had found him too. The night continued, silent except for the hum of engines and the soft, steady breathing of the dragons asleep on a human chest. And for the first time in weeks, the hatchery's silence was no longer frightening. Somewhere deep in the station, life and trust had taken root in the most unexpected place. Arvin Holt woke to a soft weight on his chest. He had barely slept, keeping still so the hatchlings could rest, but their tiny bodies pressed close to him now, warm and trembling slightly. He opened his eyes and saw the smallest one lifting its head to look at him. Its golden eyes reflected the dim light of the maintenance bay, curious but unafraid. Arvin blinked and smiled quietly. They had chosen him. Somehow, they had trusted him completely. The truth of why the hatchlings had come to him was not yet known to anyone in the station. The upper decks had searched endlessly, scanning vents, corridors, even maintenance tunnels, but had found nothing. The dragon's elders shook their heads, baffled. Hatchlings did not leave nests for no reason. Yet here they were, safe and sound in the hands of a human no one had noticed, no one had expected. Arvin began his day carefully. He moved slowly, adjusting a small heater so that the hatchlings would be comfortable. One of them curled its tail around his wrist, another rested its tiny head on his shoulder. He whispered softly as he worked, explaining what he was doing, although he doubted they understood the words. But he knew they understood his voice. They understood the quiet patience and the calm in his hands. 4 days, the hatchlings had been alone. The nest had been their home, but it was loud, full of voices, and filled with rules that frightened them. Even the gentle dragon caretakers could not give them the quiet safety they needed. Their instincts had told them to leave, to find someone who could offer warmth without judgment, someone who would protect them without needing to control them. Arvin had done nothing extraordinary. He had not sought out the dragons. He had not tried to claim them, feed them, or make them obey. He had simply existed quietly, repairing machines, moving slowly, speaking softly. And that had been enough. The hatchlings had recognized something in him, something they could not name but understood deeply. As he worked, he noticed small changes in their behavior. They followed his hands as he adjusted heaters, curling closer when he spoke. They stretched their wings slightly, testing him, testing the safety of his presence. When he held a tiny one gently, it relaxed completely, trusting him with its fragile body. One by one, they revealed their fear had disappeared. They were no longer hiding. They were learning to feel safe. Arvin realized that humans had something the dragons could not always find in their own kind: patience. Humans did not rush, did not demand immediate obedience, and often acted without expectation of reward. The hatchlings responded to that instinctively. In the warmth of his presence, they could sleep, explore, and grow without fear. It was a bond that needed no words, no laws, no hierarchy. It was trust. Outside the maintenance decks, the galaxy remained unaware of what had happened. The council dragons continued to argue, blaming the humans, blaming careless caretakers, blaming chance. No one had considered that the hatchlings might have chosen of their own free will. In the council chambers, elders spoke of regulations, rules, and protocols, but none understood the quiet miracle happening in the depths below. Arvin spent hours observing them, making sure they had enough warmth, enough food, enough space to move. He could see their small bodies growing stronger. Their scales shone brighter in the dim light. Their eyes, once fearful and cautious, now glimmered with curiosity. Every day, he whispered encouragement, even though he thought they might not understand the words. They understood the feeling, the tone, the care in his voice. The hatchlings explored slowly at first. One climbed up Arvin's arm, then paused, looking down at him with a questioning tilt of its head. Another tried to flap its tiny wings, brushing against his shoulder. Arvin laughed softly. It was not the loud laugh of surprise or fear, but the quiet laugh of someone who had discovered a hidden joy. The hatchlings responded to that joy, curling closer, feeling his heartbeat through the rhythm of his own chest. He thought about why the hatchlings had come to him instead of staying in the nest. The answer was simple: he had offered what no one else could. Safety without expectation. Warmth without control. Presence without command. In a galaxy full of rules, power, and politics, that quiet human had become more than a guardian. He had become a sanctuary. Even the hatchlings seemed to sense the difference. One, braver than the others, crawled onto his shoulder and rested its tiny head near his neck. Another tucked itself under his jacket near his chest. They moved slowly, testing the trust, and every time they returned to him, they learned more about safety. By the end of the day, they were no longer fearful of touch, sound, or movement. They were learning to live with a human who simply existed alongside them. Arvin did not consider himself special. He did not think of himself as heroic or important. He was just a mechanic, a human doing what he knew best. And yet, the hatchlings had chosen him. It was a bond formed not by law, not by design, but by instinct. They needed warmth, patience, and a heartbeat to feel safe, and he had offered all three without realizing it. As night approached, Arvin settled onto the floor of the maintenance bay. The hatchlings curled around him, tiny bodies resting against his chest, shoulders, and arms. He whispered softly, not expecting a response, but feeling a connection that words could not explain. He could feel their breathing, their small hearts beating in unison, and he knew that this was only the beginning. Above them, the council dragons continued their search. Drones flew through corridors, sensors scanned every corner, and voices argued endlessly. But no one looked in the quiet, humming maintenance decks. No one expected that a human no one watched had become the protector of the dragons no one could find. And in the stillness, among wires and humming engines, trust grew. It grew in silence, in warmth, in gentle hands that moved carefully among the small creatures. The hatchlings had chosen him because he offered something rare and precious, a safe place to be themselves, to grow, and to learn without fear. Arvin did not need recognition. He did not need reward. All he knew was that he could provide a quiet sanctuary, and that the hatchlings had found their home in him. It was the simplest of truths, yet it was stronger than any rule, louder than any alarm, and more important than any law. The day ended with Arvin still in the same spot, the hatchlings asleep on his chest. Outside, the station continued its rhythm of light, hums, and movement. Above, the galaxy remained unaware. But below, a human and several tiny dragons had discovered something powerful, a bond of trust that no search, no law, and no fear could ever break. The council dragons had grown restless. Days had passed since the hatchlings vanished from the nest, and the entire station was in uproar. Scanners, drones, and patrols searched every corridor, vent, and hidden space, but nothing showed the missing dragons. Commander Zale paced the council chamber, claws clicking against the polished floor, wings folding and unfolding in frustration. "They cannot vanish like this," Zale said, his voice low but filled with tension. "Hatchlings never leave without reason. And yet every search comes up empty. Where are they hiding?" Others argued, blaming careless humans or hidden predators. Some suggested the hatchlings had been stolen. But none of the elders considered the impossible, that the dragons had chosen a human of their own will. Meanwhile, far below, Arvin Holt continued his quiet life. The hatchlings had grown bolder. By now, they trusted him completely. One tiny dragon perched on his shoulder, testing the reach of its wings, while another stretched across his chest like a warm scarf. The soft, rhythmic rise and fall of their breathing had become part of his own routine. He never moved too quickly. He never spoke too loudly. He simply existed, providing warmth and safety. The hatchlings explored slowly, crawling along the folds of his jacket, stretching their tiny wings, testing the soft hum of the engines. Arvin watched them carefully, adjusting heaters, tightening loose panels, and offering quiet words of encouragement. The moment he spoke, they paused, listening to the gentle tone of his voice. They seemed to understand that no harm would come from him. Far above, the council dragons finally decided to check the maintenance decks. It was the last place left to search, and none expected to find the hatchlings there. Humans worked in those areas, yes, but humans were not trusted. Dragons were certain their young could not have survived down there. The elevators carried the dragons down into the dim, humming levels. Zale led the way, wings folded tightly, eyes scanning every shadow. Drones floated ahead, casting pale light over pipes, panels, and wires. Every corner was inspected. Every floor was checked. And then, near the oldest engine banks, they saw something that stopped them cold. There, lying on the floor, was a human. A human no one had thought of, no one had expected. And across his chest, arms, and shoulders were the missing hatchlings. They slept peacefully, small bodies curled and entwined, wings folded, tails draped gently over him. One even rested its tiny head near his collarbone, trusting completely. The council dragons froze. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the engines and the quiet breathing of the hatchlings. No alarms sounded. No one shouted. It was a moment of disbelief. These tiny, fragile dragons, missing for days, were safe and alive, and they had chosen a human as their refuge. Zale stepped closer, his eyes wide with surprise. He had seen humans before, but he had never expected this. This cannot be, he whispered. They are with a human, willingly. Arvin did not move. He had sensed them approaching but did not want to disturb the hatchlings. They were sleeping, safe, and he could feel their trust. Slowly, he shifted slightly to make room, but he did not wake them. One of the hatchlings stretched, yawned, and returned to its curled position. The elder dragons looked on, unsure of what to do. Their search had failed because they had never considered choice. Dragons were strong, intelligent, and careful, yet they had overlooked the possibility that their young could decide for themselves. The hatchlings had not been stolen or lost, they had found sanctuary in the one place the elders would never have thought to check. One young dragon among the council whispered softly to Zale, "They are safe, because they wanted to be here." It was a truth that shook the elders. Every human in the station had been considered unreliable, careless, or unworthy. Yet here, a single human had become the guardian of the most precious beings in the galaxy, without intending to, without trying to claim them, without even knowing what had happened. Arvin gently adjusted the smallest hatchling, feeling its tiny claws curl into his jacket. He spoke softly, not to explain, not to ask for permission, but to share comfort. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe." The hatchling stirred slightly but did not wake fully. They had made their choice. They had found warmth and protection in a human heart, and they were content. Above, the council dragons realized they had underestimated not only the human but the hatchlings themselves. Trust and instinct had guided the young dragons to safety, something no law or censor could replicate. Zale looked around at the other elders. Their usual authority seemed to falter. The galaxy was full of rules, but here was an exception that could not be explained by law or reason. These hatchlings had chosen their guardian, and no one could argue with instinct. The council finally stepped back, leaving Arvin and the hatchlings undisturbed. There was a silent agreement. This human, unknown and unremarkable in the eyes of the galaxy, had earned a role no one else could have offered. He had provided something impossible to force: safety without fear, warmth without command, patience without expectation. Arvin felt the hatchling stir once more, shifting slightly on his chest as if acknowledging the presence of the dragons above. Their eyes flickered open for a brief moment, watching the elders with curiosity, then closing again. They did not fear the dragons, they had chosen their human for this moment, and it was enough. Night came to the maintenance decks, and the dim light of the engines cast gentle shadows across the scene. Arvin remained still, the hatchlings resting on him, their tiny breathing steady. Above them, the council left the area, carrying back a lesson they had not expected to learn. Sometimes, strength is not in power, but in trust. Sometimes, guidance is not given by command, but by gentle presence. And sometimes, the galaxy's most precious beings find protection in the most unlikely places. In the quiet of the maintenance bay, Arvin understood that he had become more than a mechanic. He had become a sanctuary. The hatchlings had chosen him, not for his strength, not for his skill, but for the quiet care he offered without thought or pride. And in that choice, the galaxy had learned something profound, even if it did not yet understand it fully. That trust, patience, and warmth could surpass fear, rules, and expectation. As he settled for the night, the hatchlings tucked close to him, he whispered once more, "You are safe. Always." The engines hummed, the lights dimmed, and the quiet miracle of a human chosen by dragons continued, unseen by the galaxy but alive in every heartbeat and every breath. The elders left, unsure how to explain what they had witnessed, but one truth remained: the hatchlings had made their decision. They had found a protector, and it was a human. A quiet, gentle human who had done nothing extraordinary, except exist in a way that was extraordinary enough. Days passed quietly in the maintenance decks. The galaxy above continued its usual rhythm, unaware of the small miracle unfolding below. Arvenholt moved slowly among engines, panels, and blinking lights, careful not to disturb the hatchlings. They had grown stronger now, scales shining in subtle shades of gold and green, tiny wings flaring occasionally as they tested their strength. The upper decks continued to monitor the search for the missing hatchlings, but the drones and sensors found nothing. Council dragons argued endlessly about where the hatchlings might be and who was responsible for their disappearance. Some humans were blamed, some caretakers scolded, and many dragons worried about the rules being broken. None considered the possibility that the hatchlings had chosen freely. None thought that a human could offer the care and patience that the dragons themselves could not. In the lower decks, Arven went about his work without concern for blame or recognition. Each day, he spoke softly to the hatchlings, showing them warmth, safety, and presence. He adjusted heaters, repaired engines, and quietly shared the rhythm of his life. The hatchlings responded instinctively. They climbed on him, curled against him, and learned that trust could exist without fear. One even perched on his shoulder, flapping its tiny wings experimentally while he hummed in quiet encouragement. The upper decks finally realized that the hatchlings were not lost, not stolen, and not hiding in any dangerous place. They were with Arven. The council dragons arrived once more, curious but cautious. They observed the scene quietly, expecting chaos or fear. Instead, they saw a human sitting calmly on the floor, hatchlings sleeping on his chest and arms, tiny bodies completely relaxed, breathing in unison with his own. The council was silent. For once, rules and hierarchy mattered less than instinct and trust. The elders watched as the hatchlings shifted slightly, curling more comfortably against Arven, tiny claws brushing his sleeves. No command had been given. No cage had been built. The dragons had simply chosen this human because he had offered something rare: quiet protection and gentle presence. Commander Zale spoke softly to the others. "We have underestimated humans," he said. "Not in power, not in skill, but in something different. Something the young dragons respond to." The other elders nodded slowly. They realized that humans did not need authority to provide safety. Humans did not need to command or control to earn trust. Sometimes, the simplest acts, soft words, steady hands, warmth, and patience, were stronger than any law or power the galaxy could enforce. The story of Arven and the hatchlings spread through the station. Other humans, once dismissed as weak or unimportant, were seen in a new light. They could offer care, protection, and understanding in ways the dragons had never considered. The galaxy began to rethink what humans could do, not by force or strength, but by quiet presence and trustworthiness. The hatchlings, for their part, continued to grow under Arven's care. They learned to move, stretch their wings, and test their limits, all without fear. They explored the maintenance bay, climbing over engines and pipes, but always returning to his chest or shoulder when tired. They had chosen him for more than safety. They had chosen him for patience, for quiet guidance, for the feeling of being completely accepted without question. One day, as Arven adjusted a heat regulator, a young dragon from the council approached him. It watched the hatchlings with careful eyes, then looked at Arven. For a long moment, it did not speak. Then it said softly, "You have taught them something no law or rule could teach. You have shown that trust can be chosen, not forced." Arven smiled quietly, brushing a tiny claw with his fingers. "I didn't teach them anything," he said. "They taught me. They taught me to be careful, to be gentle, to understand without asking anything in return." The council dragons nodded in understanding. They had always valued strength, wisdom, and authority. But here, in a quiet maintenance bay, they saw that humans had a different kind of strength, one measured not in fire, claw, or command, but in patience, warmth, and quiet care. From that day, the galaxy began to change its view of humans. Where dragons had once been skeptical, now there was cautious respect. Where humans had once been overlooked, now they were considered capable of things no one had imagined. It was not the human skill with machines that mattered most, but the human capacity to be present, steady, and patient when it was needed most. The hatchlings became ambassadors of this quiet truth. They returned to the nest eventually, but they visited Arven every day. They showed the council dragons that choice and trust could create bonds stronger than fear or authority. The galaxy slowly learned that humans could protect without demanding obedience, comfort without seeking reward, and guide without forcing. Arven continued his work in the maintenance decks, always quietly, always carefully. The hatchlings often clambered over him, exploring the pipes, resting on engines, or curling against his chest. And every time the council dragons observed from above, they saw the same lesson. The smallest, quietest human had changed their understanding of care, protection, and trust. In the end, the galaxy understood something simple but profound. Humans were not strong in the way dragons measured strength. They were not the most intelligent in the way the galaxy measured knowledge. But they had something rarer, the ability to be a sanctuary, a home, a steady presence in the chaos of life. The hatchlings had chosen wisely, and in doing so, the galaxy learned that power was not always in fire or claw, it could also be in patience, warmth, and trust. Arven looked down at the tiny dragons asleep against him and whispered softly, "You are safe. Always." They stirred slightly, tiny claws brushing his chest, wings twitching gently. And in that quiet bay, among humming engines and blinking lights, the human and the hatchling shared a simple truth. Even in a vast, complicated galaxy, trust and care could change everything. The story ended not with fireworks or battles, but with quiet warmth. A human who had done nothing extraordinary, except exist with patience, kindness, and care, had earned the trust of dragons and the respect of the galaxy. It was a gentle lesson, but one that the stars themselves seemed to acknowledge, that the smallest acts of trust and kindness could echo far beyond what anyone imagined. And so, Arven, the human who no one had expected, became a symbol of what the galaxy could learn from its quiet inhabitants. Not all heroes wore armor. Not all victories were fought with claws or fire. Some were won in silence, in patience, in the soft rise and fall of tiny hearts resting on a human chest. The hatchlings stretched, yawned, and nestled closer, and the galaxy, far above, finally understood the quiet power of humans.